Alright, you guys ready for this? This is gonna be cool. Get ready, here we go. Boom, look at that. If I run it a few times, you see it's randomizing all these cubes in this space. And man, I would not want to do this manually. 100% not. And you can kind of see how this would be useful. So let me just quickly do something. Let me just change the code just a tiny bit. I'm going to zero out all these cubes again. Everything's back at the origin. Run this again, and now you see it's just doing it in the X and the Z axis and skipping the Y. So you can imagine if this is a bunch of rocks or a bunch of shrubs, you know, or grass, trees, whatever you want, you can randomize it in space just like this. Save yourself a ton of time having to place things out. It's a quick way to scatter, and it's a cool way to do it because you're programming. And of course I can also do rotate, so let's just put rotate here, and maybe I just want to rotate Y, so let's do that. See, now I can randomize rotations. Now we're going to try to work our way towards this. We're not going to quite get there this lesson, but I promise that by the next lesson you guys will be able to do this. So we're just going to work through some of the concepts and some of the, you know, the different types of things that we'll be doing here, so that by the time we get here, it's going to make sense. It's not going to be just a random mess of code. I mean, of course I can just show you how to type this out, but that's not really learning. So I want to show you guys, you know, things that will help you understand the code, which is the most important part. And it's only 7 lines of code. You can see with 7 lines of code you can do this incredibly powerful thing. And you know, all that's left is really just to understand it. So let's just start. Let's delete that. I'm gonna delete this code and clear everything. So, oh yeah, somebody mentioned in the comments something about running the code. So if I just type print hello world, there's actually a cool way you can execute this code, and I totally forgot because I don't have a numpad, but if you have a numpad, you can hit the numpad enter key and that will execute the code, much like if you hit the play button. But there's also another way you can run the code, which I'll sometimes do, and that's control enter. So if you have the code selected here like this, you can hit control enter and that will run the code, much like if you press the play button. You just need to make sure you have you know, this panel is in focus. So if I select here, you can see there's this white outline around the border of this panel, and that just shows you which panel has focus. So if I select the script editor, you can see now the script editor has that white outline, and that's what has focus. You know, if I had outliner here, you can see I can click here and it'll put the focus to here. If I click, you know, like to something else, whatever, you know, you get the idea. So let's cover some of the concepts that we went over last week. Just a quick recap. So if you remember this, anything in these quotations, single or double quotations, that's a string. And we had numbers here. So this is a number, you know, like 3 is a number. These are all numbers. And we also had lists. So we had like a list of numbers like this. We also had a list where we had a list of strings. So we had, you know, a list of strings like this. And these are different types of data within Python. It's known as a data type. So this data type is string. This data type is an integer, or it's also known as an int. So int or integer, like that. And this data type is a list. So there's a few other data types in Python which we didn't go over, but I'm gonna quickly go over them now. And by the way, you can use this hash or pound symbol basically just to add a comment, and comments don't really do anything in Python. So Python just skips over the comments, and it doesn't really execute anything, you know, after the pound symbol. It's just a nice way to add like a bit of, you know, you can add notes, you can add some sort of human touch to your code so that when you give it to somebody, they can read it and they can say like, oh, I understand what you're doing here. I'm just using these comments to kind of organize these types of data a little bit so you guys can understand what the hell I'm talking about. So there's a few other data types. There's float. So float is basically a decimal number. So 1.5, that's like a decimal. And whenever you have a decimal, it's considered a different type of data. It's not an int. It's called a float because it means a floating point integer. Now don't worry about what that means, but it's treated a little bit different in Python. Like Python deals with ints and it deals with floats a little bit different, but you can still interact from one to the other. So I can add these two together. So if I run just this line, you can see I get 2.5 because it's, 1.5 plus 1 is 2.5. Nothing crazy, but you can interact ints and floats. But what you can't do is you can't interact strings with other types of data like a number. So I can't run this. It complains. It goes type error. I cannot concatenate string and int objects. What the hell does that mean? Basically means Python doesn't know what to do with this, because how do you add, text with numbers? You would think that it would do something like hello world 1, but it actually doesn't, because it treats it as a different type of data. So, same thing if I had 0.0, it's going to complain again. But what I can do is I can put it between quotations. So if I run this now, let me just clear this, run this, you see hello world 1. Because I've put it in between quotations, it's no longer a number, it's now a string. So that's, but what if I do this? I put 1 there and I run this, it's not going to give me 2, it'll actually just give me 11. It just joins these two texts together. So I can do hello and I can do world. And if I run this, it'll join these two together like this, hello world. Now, if I wanted a space, I can add a space there, run it, and it'll give me a space. You'll get hello world with a space. I can also move this back here. So move the space to the back word and we get hello world, much the same. Or I can do something a little bit more cool, like this, put a space in the middle. How about that? Run that. Same result, hello world. So this is all cool and all, makes sense, but there's a different way to actually add these strings together, and that's called format. So if I just do hello space and I put this open curly bracket, close curly bracket, and then I type dot format, and in between the open bracket, close bracket here, I'm just going to put world. So if I run this code, you'll see what happens. I get the same result, hello world. But what's actually going on here? It's doing something different. It's not just, adding the different strings together, with the plus symbol. What it's actually doing is it's taking this world and it's, Python recognizes that this open curly bracket, close curly bracket, it means something in Python. When Python sees it, it's like, oh, I think you want to do something here. What do you want to do? And you say, oh, I want to format world. So it takes this world here, this string, and it kind of combines it together. So it'll take this, and it'll basically replace this. This is almost like a placeholder. It'll replace this with world, and it'll also get rid of the little brackets, the quotations, I mean. So it basically does that. So you can also do, something a little bit more interesting, where instead of giving it a string here, instead of giving format a string here, you can give it a variable. So if I say a is equal to world like this, I can actually give format, instead of world here like this, I can just give it a, because a is equal to world. So that's what the value of a is. So if I give hello world and dot format a, hello, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, dot format a. Let me run this first. So I store world into a. Now I'll run this. You can see we get the same result, hello world. Now this is going to come in handy in a bit, and I'll show you why. I mean, it's a lot more to type than just hello plus space plus world. You know, this seems like more work, but it'll actually be less work once you kind of utilize it in a little bit of a better way. So let's tie this back to Maya. I'm going to create a new cube just at the origin. Then maybe I'll just move it, you know, some random amount in space like this. Now I can use kind of a command in Python to basically get all the values. So you can see in the channel box here, I've got some values in the translate XYZ. How do I get this value? You know, rather than just looking at it here, you can use some functions inside of Python to actually get these values. So first thing you need to do is import my.cmds as cmds. You know, if you remember, this is just how to, we got to put this line. It's just how you need to do it. You know, don't question it. All right, just do it. And now we have access to all the commands. So inside of the commands, I'm going to use a command called get adder. And what it does is it gets an attribute. It gets a value of an attribute. So in between here, I can put the name of the object I want to get the attribute of. So right now this object's called pcube1, and we can just use pcube1, copy the name, I'll put it here. I accidentally copy and pasted into Maya itself. That's something I actually really hate in Maya, is the copy and paste function. You see, it's if you copy and you paste it there, it does that. Make sure you copy the name and paste it in the script editor and not inside of the viewport. Otherwise it'll just paste the cube object in there. But yeah, if I put this name pcube1 here, I can access one of the attributes. So I want to access translate x. So you just type dot translate x, and the dot is basically anything after the dot is what the attribute is. So in this instance, I'm using translate x. So now if I run this, and then now I run this code, you can see what the result will be. We're getting -4.9, etc., etc., and that's just what we have up here in the channel box. It's kind of gotten this value, and it's gotten an even more precise version of the value than we can even see in the channel box. So you can see, like, this is just a string. It's just the name of the object, dot, and whatever the attribute is. And the reason I typed it in this specific way, translate x with a capital X, is because Maya has, you know, it has its own naming system for all the different attributes. If you want to access them using some sort of, you know, like Python or Mel scripting, you have to type it in a specific way, because internally this is how translate x is named, you know, very specifically, you know, with the small t and the capital X at the end. So I'm going to duplicate this cube a bunch of times and just move it in space, a bunch of different random locations like this. Now, what if I want to get all the values of all these? You know, I can just type the different names, pcube2, and then I get the value here. I can print the value so I can see it, run the code, prints the value. Or, you know, pcube3, I can do this over and over again, so I can copy this line. So maybe let's just do it a bunch of times. So we do pcube1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we have one more, 6. So this is a bad way to do things in Python, because you're doing it manually. You're changing these numbers manually. And what if we had 1,000 cubes? You know, it would take a long time to change all these names, which is why I'm going to show you guys a better way. You know, you definitely don't want to be doing this, typing this code and copying and doing it multiple times. But you can see it's gotten all the translate x values of all these different cubes. It's pretty handy. If you need to inspect some values, you can use this little trick to do it. But I'll show you a better way than typing it out manually like this. And that's to use the dot format, like we were doing before with a string. We can use dot format, but we can also use it in conjunction with something known as a for loop. So what is a loop? A loop in programming terms is a way to basically loop over a number of objects, or loop over like a X amount of times to perform the same action on each different type of object that you have, or like each, you can perform it a number of times. It's just basically a way to repeat some sort of command, but across a range of different things. And it saves you from having to type it out over and over again. So let's get into it. So the first thing you want to do, I'll just clear this out, is to do a loop. You can say for I in cmds.ls sl is equal to true. This should look pretty familiar if you remember. If I just copy and paste this up here and run this on its own, you can see it gives us a list of our selection, basically, all the names of what we have selected. And then if you put this in conjunction with this for I in cmds.ls, this command, if you put this together with this, what it's basically going to do is it's going to take every object you have selected, it's going to store the name in I, but it's going to do it in a loop. So it'll start off with the first thing you have selected, and then it'll perform some action. So if I make a new line here, it's going to indent for me automatically. If it doesn't, you just hit tab, it'll indent it in. And it's important to do the indentation, because if you don't, Python's going to complain. Python's quite particular with the indentations like that. So if I do print I, this is all I have selected right now. So if I run this code, it's just going to print pcube1. So what it's done is it's gone over what I have selected, it's stored the item in here, and then it's printed it out. But if I have multiple things selected and I run this, you can see it'll do pcube1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. It's basically printed it, but it's basically done it in a loop. So it's done it starting from here, and it's basically gone through everything I have selected and it's printed it out. So what it's doing is it's taking the objects within this list, you see pcube1, 2, 3, and it's doing this print command. It's doing it, basically on every single object. It's going through this entire list and it's printing them all out. And we can use this to our advantage somehow. It's taking this name, and we could use that name again to get the values. So we do cmds.getAttr. In here, rather than typing like what we did before, pcube1 like this, which is kind of, it's a slow way to do it because you have to type it out each time for each number. We already have the name. I mean, the name is here. We're just looping over all the names. So rather than saying pcube1, we could just use the placeholder like we were doing before. And here I'm going to put translate x. And inside this placeholder, we're going to replace this with the name of the object we're looping over. So type format there, and you can put I right there like that. So this I is the same as this I. So it's basically, it's a variable, basically every time it loops over, it stores the name of the object inside this I variable, and it will replace it each time. So the first time it runs, it'll use pcube1, it'll store pcube1 as I. The next time it runs, it'll store pcube2 as I. So basically everything you have selected. So if I run this code again, we don't get a result because we're not printing. Make sure you print it out so you can see the result. Let's run this. You can see now it's getting the values of all the different objects that I have selected, and it's printing it out, the translate x. Of course, I can use translate y, run this again, and it'll show me all the translate y. If I move this all the way down so it's below 0, you can see it'll give me all the negative numbers. So that's basically what this is doing. We're just taking this variable, which would be the name of the cube that it's looping over, and it's just going to replace it here because we're formatting the string. This saves us from having to type it out. And you can imagine if I had hundreds of these, if I had hundreds of these cubes, I wouldn't want to type out like pcube1, 2, 3 all the way to like whatever. It'll just take forever. We'll be here all year I'll be an old man. So there we go. It's just got me all the values and it's just printed it out. So, you know, this is a really powerful thing, like loops. And whilst we haven't done anything that crazy, we're just getting the values. You know, in the next lesson, what I'm going to show you guys is how to set values. So I can set an attribute and I can set it to a particular value. For example, 10 right now. It'll move all these cubes up to, you know, 10 in Y. Of course, I can put X or Z and run it. It'll move it all to 10 like that. Of course, you can say 20 and it'll move it like 20 units out. And in the next lesson, I'm gonna basically combine this set attr command with a randomization so that we can randomly change this number so that it's not a fixed number. It'll be a different number each time. And that's how we're gonna end up with all these random positions in space rather than a fixed value. So yeah, make sure you stick around for that. Hey, hopefully you enjoyed that lesson and you learned a thing or two about Python. I know we didn't do anything super crazy, super cool this lesson, but I promise by the end of next lesson, we'll be doing that randomization thing that we did at the beginning of this. So yeah, make sure you stick around.